Hey everybody, it's June 13th, 2026, and today we are switching theaters completely. And I think a lot of you are going to be glad for the change of scenery because while all of our attention has been locked onto the Strait of Hormuz and the Iran situation over the last week, something absolutely massive just happened in our own hemisphere. The President of the United States just announced that the most powerful cartel boss in the Western Hemisphere, the man who built Tren de Aragua from a single prison cell into a transnational criminal empire spanning multiple continents, is dead. Vaporized? Gone. And the way it happened, the platforms involved, the coordination with a government that 6 months ago was led by a man now sitting in a federal jail cell in New York, and the broader strategic picture this fits into. This is one of the most fascinating stories of the entire year. And honestly, it might be more significant long-term than people realize. So let's break it all down, because this story has layers, just like everything else we cover on this channel. And once you understand who this guy was, how he ran his empire, and what this strike actually represents, you are going to see exactly why this is a genuinely historic moment in the broader campaign against organized crime in Latin America. So let's start with who we are actually talking about. His name was Hector Rusthenford Guerrero Flores, born in 1983 in Maracay, in the Venezuelan state of Aragua. And if that name Aragua sounds familiar, it is because that is literally where Tren de Aragua gets its name. This is the gang's founding territory, and Guerrero Flores, who went by the nickname Niño Guerrero, which translates roughly to warrior kid or boy warrior, became one of the most consequential criminal figures in the modern history of Latin America. His criminal record goes all the way back to the year 2000, when he was linked to petty crimes and robberies that eventually landed him in Tocaron prison in Aragua state. And here is where the story gets absolutely wild, because what happened inside that prison is honestly one of the most insane things I have ever covered on this channel. And I have covered a lot of insane things. Guerrero Flores did not just survive prison, he thrived in it. According to BBC News reporting, he lived like a king during his time in Tocaron. He occupied an entire floor of the facility, monitored by his own bodyguards, while the prison itself contained a swimming pool, a zoo, and a nightclub. Think about that for a second. A maximum security prison in Venezuela had a literal nightclub inside of it, and the man running the most dangerous transnational gang in the hemisphere was operating his criminal empire from inside a cell block that had better amenities than most resorts. Federal prosecutors in the United States alleged in an indictment last year that the Venezuelan government under Maduro allowed Guerrero Flores to control the day-to-day operations of the entire prison. Let that sink in. The state allowed a cartel leader to run a prison as his personal headquarters, complete with luxury amenities, while he directed a criminal network that prosecutors say grew from a Venezuelan prison gang into a transnational operation with tentacles stretching through large swaths of Latin America, the United States, and even across the Atlantic to Spain. And he escaped. Twice. He escaped Tocaron prison in 2012 and was rearrested a year later. Then in 2018, he was sentenced to a 17-year prison term. And then in 2023, he escaped again and remained at large from that point forward. While Guerrero Flores was directing operations, sometimes from inside prison and sometimes on the run, Tren de Aragua transformed from a regional prison gang into one of the largest criminal organizations in Latin America, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. The organization's reach expanded into human trafficking, extortion, drug trafficking, and a level of violence that earned it a designation from the United States government as a foreign terrorist organization. He was indicted in New York federal court late last year on charges including racketeering, conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists, and cocaine conspiracy. The State Department put up to $5 million on the table for information leading to his capture. He had nicknames like the Unspeakable and the Big Eyebrow, which honestly sounds like something out of a Bond villain casting call. But the reality of what this man directed was genuinely brutal. Just this past week, Spanish police arrested 13 suspected members of Tren de Aragua across 5 cities, seizing drugs and dismantling 2 drug laboratories that were producing 2C, which is a mixture of cocaine, MDMA, and ketamine. That investigation traced back to the arrest of Guerrero Flores' own brother in Barcelona under an international arrest warrant from Venezuelan authorities. This was a global network: Venezuela, the United States, Spain, and everywhere in between. Now let's talk about what actually happened on Friday, because the strike itself is where the real military hardware story is, and it also represents an absolutely stunning geopolitical shift that I want to make sure you fully understand. President Trump announced the strike on Truth Social Friday evening. His exact words were, at my direction, the United States Southern Command delivered a swift and lethal kinetic strike to successfully execute Niño Guerrero, the infamous leader of Tren de Aragua, one of the most bloodthirsty terrorist organizations on planet Earth. And then he added the line that I think is the most important sentence in this entire story. This action was coordinated closely with our friends in Venezuela, with whom we are working very well. As a result, Tren de Aragua terrorists no longer have safe haven in Venezuela or anywhere else. Our friends in Venezuela read that again. 6 months ago, in early January of this year, the Venezuelan government under Nicolas Maduro was the United States adversary in the Western Hemisphere. Maduro was sanctioned, designated, sought after on narco-terrorism charges, and then, in what Trump described as a daring nighttime raid, U.S. military forces removed Maduro from power in early January. Maduro is now in federal custody in New York, facing charges of narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, and possession of machine guns and destructive devices. He has pleaded not guilty, and now 5 months later, the post-Maduro Venezuelan government is described by the President of the United States as our friends, and that government just conducted a joint operation with the United States military to eliminate the leader of Tren de Aragua inside Venezuelan territory. The Venezuelan government's communications ministry put out its own statement describing this as a joint operation between Venezuelan and United States security agencies in the southeastern Bolivar state. Bolivar state, for those who do not know Venezuelan geography, is in the southeast of the country, a vast region bordering Brazil and Guyana, home to significant mining operations, and a lot of remote, hard-to-access terrain that has historically been a haven for armed groups operating outside the reach of central government control. The Venezuelan statement said that during the operation, clashes occurred with members of these criminal structures, resulting in the death of Hector Rustenford Guerrero Flores. And U.S. Southern Command Commander General Francis Donovan put out his own statement on X, confirming the joint operation had targeted what he called a Tren de Aragua compound. Now, let's talk about the hardware and the intelligence picture, because this is where the operation gets genuinely impressive from a fighter, pilot, and operation standpoint. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth posted on X that the strike was conducted earlier in the week, and that Guerrero was confirmed killed during the strike. Trump's Truth Social post included video showing what was described as a green-roofed building disappearing under a cloud of billowing smoke caused by a massive explosion. That is the visual signature of a precision-guided munition delivering exactly the kind of overwhelming kinetic effect on a single structure that you would expect from either a standoff air-launched weapon or cruise missile. The same broad category of capability we have been talking about all week in the context of the Iran conflict, just redirected to a completely different theater and a completely different mission set. And here's the part of the story that I think deserves the most attention. A senior administration official confirmed that the CIA provided intelligence for the operation, and the Venezuelan government's own statement said the joint operation involved intelligence sharing and specialized technical support. So what you have here is a fusion operation. American signals intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, and CIA human intelligence networks combined with Venezuelan ground-level knowledge of the Bolivar state terrain and the compound's location, layout, and security posture. That kind of fusion is exactly the model that worked so well in the operation against El Mencho back in February, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel in Mexico, where Mexican military forces conducted the raid using what their own defense ministry called complementary information provided by U.S. authorities, with a U.S. defense official confirming an interagency U.S. task force played a role in the operation. Let me actually take a minute to draw the parallel between this operation and the El Mencho operation back in February, because I think the pattern here tells you something really important about the Trump administration's broader strategy in Latin America. Back in February, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, the founder and leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the most powerful and ruthless criminal organizations inside Mexico, according to the DEA, was killed during a Mexican military raid in the town of Tapalpa in Jalisco state. He died of his wounds while being airlifted to Mexico City. 6 other cartel operatives were killed in that operation. 3 Mexican soldiers were injured. And in the aftermath, suspected cartel supporters set fires and directed roadblocks across multiple Mexican states, with the U.S. State Department urging American citizens in parts of Mexico to shelter in place. Notably, this was happening right as Jalisco was preparing to host matches for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which kicked off the same month. Reuters reporting at the time noted, there is a real sense in Mexico and beyond that governments need to show the U.S. that they are willing and able to take military action on their own, lest Washington send special forces into the country itself. So you had El Mencho taken down by Mexican forces with American intelligence support in February. And now you have Nino Guerrero taken down by a joint U.S.-Venezuelan operation in June. 2 of the most significant cartel leaders in the Western Hemisphere, both eliminated within about 4 months of each other, both operations involving close coordination between the United States and the host nation's security forces, both representing massive symbolic and operational victories in Trump's broader anti-cartel campaign. and both following a pattern where the host government gets to claim credit for taking decisive action against organized crime on its own soil, while Washington gets the strategic outcome it wants without having to unilaterally violate the sovereignty of a Latin American nation in a way that would generate enormous diplomatic blowback. Except, in Venezuela's case, the dynamic is even more interesting because of the Maduro removal. Because for years, Tren de Aragua's relationship with the Venezuelan state under Maduro was, to put it generously, complicated. We just talked about how Guerrero Flores allegedly ran an entire prison as his personal headquarters with the government's tacit permission. The U.S. government's own designation of Tren de Aragua as a narco-terrorist organization came alongside accusations that elements of the Maduro regime had used the gang as an instrument of state policy, both for domestic repression and for projecting influence through criminal networks across the region. So when Trump says Tren de Aragua terrorists no longer have safe haven in Venezuela or anywhere else, what he is actually describing is the closing of a sanctuary that existed specifically because of the previous regime's relationship with the organization. Remove Maduro, install a government willing to cooperate, and suddenly the safe haven that Tren de Aragua's leadership had relied on for years simply evaporates. That is not just a tactical win against one gang leader. That is a structural change in the security landscape of an entire country. And let's put this strike in the broader context of what has been happening across the hemisphere since September of last year, because this is not an isolated action. This is part of what Trump's administration has explicitly framed as a campaign against narco-terrorists. Since September, the U.S. military has struck dozens of alleged drug boats in the eastern Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, an operation that has resulted in more than 200 people killed, with the administration saying these strikes target vessels involved in drug smuggling without, in many of these cases, providing detailed public evidence for each individual strike. That is a sustained, months-long maritime interdiction campaign that has fundamentally changed the risk calculus for anyone attempting to move narcotics by sea in that part of the world. And now you add to that campaign a ground and air operation that took out the single most significant leader of the single most dangerous transnational gang operating in that exact theater. The boats, the compounds, the prison networks, the leadership structure, all of it is being targeted simultaneously across multiple countries with a level of coordination between the U.S. military, the CIA, and now multiple host governments that represents a genuinely new chapter in how Washington is approaching organized crime in the Western Hemisphere. Now, let me give you the 4D chess read on what this all means, because just like with Iran, there's a strategic logic underneath the headline that I think is worth spending time on. The first thing to understand is what removing Guerrero Flores actually does to Tren de Aragua's organizational structure. He had been running this organization for more than a decade, transforming it from a prison gang into a transnational operation. Organizations built around a singular long-tenured leader with that kind of personal authority and that kind of operational history tend to fracture when that leader is removed, especially when the removal happens via a kinetic strike rather than an arrest that might allow for an orderly succession or even continued direction from custody, which is exactly what Guerrero Flores had been doing for years from inside Tuckeron prison. A man who built his power by running an empire from a prison cell cannot run that empire from a smoking crater in Bolivar State. Whatever succession fight happens inside Tren de Aragua over the coming weeks and months is going to be the first real test of whether this organization can survive the loss of its founding leadership figure, or whether it fractures into smaller, less coordinated factions that are individually easier for law enforcement and military forces across multiple countries to target. The second thing to understand is what this does for the new Venezuelan government's legitimacy, both domestically and internationally. A government that comes to power in the aftermath of a foreign military operation that removed its predecessor has an enormous legitimacy gap to close. One of the fastest ways to close that gap is to demonstrate, in a highly visible and widely reported way, that the new government is capable of and willing to take decisive action against organized crime, something the previous government was either unwilling or unable to do, or in this case, actively complicit with. By participating in a joint operation that eliminated one of the most wanted criminals in the hemisphere on its own soil, the new Venezuelan government just generated a massive amount of positive international coverage and demonstrated exactly the kind of cooperative posture that Washington wants to see from its new partner in Caracas. This is a government showing its work to both its own population and to the international community simultaneously. The third thing, and this is the one that I think connects most directly to everything else we have been covering this week, is what this says about the operational tempo and reach of the U.S. military and intelligence apparatus right now. In the span of about a week, we have watched the United States conduct 49 Tomahawk cruise missile strikes against targets inside Iran within 40 miles of Tehran, maintain a 100-day naval blockade across the Strait of Hormuz, involving dozens of ships and aircraft, support Israeli operations against Iranian air defenses and petrochemical infrastructure, and now conduct a precision strike against a cartel compound in southeastern Venezuela in coordination with a foreign partner government, using CIA intelligence and specialized technical support. That is two completely different theaters, two completely different mission sets, two completely different sets of partner relationships, all running simultaneously without any apparent degradation in the speed or precision of either campaign. The reach of American power projection right now, across multiple hemispheres and multiple categories of adversary, state actors in the Middle East, and transnational criminal organizations in Latin America, is genuinely remarkable. And I think it sends a message to anyone watching from the outside, whether that is the regime in Tehran, the remnants of Tren de Aragua, or any other organization currently sitting on a list somewhere in a Pentagon planning document, that geography is not the protection it used to be. And here's the final piece of 4D chess that I want to leave you with. The $5 million reward, the New York indictment, the foreign terrorist organization designation, all of that represented the legal and law enforcement track for dealing with Guerrero Flores. Arrest him, extradite him, prosecute him in a U.S. federal courtroom. That track was always going to be slow, complicated, and dependent on the cooperation of a Venezuelan government that, under Maduro, had every incentive not to cooperate. The removal of Maduro in January changed the math entirely. It converted Venezuela from an obstacle into a partner. And once Venezuela became a partner, the operational track, intelligence-driven, kinetic, fast, became available in a way it simply was not before. Nino Guerrero survived 2 prison escapes, a 17-year sentence, and years on the run specifically because the legal track could never quite close the distance on him while he had a sanctuary. The moment that sanctuary disappeared, the operational track closed that distance in a matter of months. That is the entire story right there. Remove the sanctuary, and even the most well-protected and longest-tenured criminal leaders become reachable. So what do you think happens to Tren de Aragua now? Does it fracture into smaller factions that are easier to dismantle one by one, or does a new leader emerge and consolidate control quickly? And what do you think this means for the broader anti-cartel campaign across Mexico, Venezuela, and the maritime routes in the Caribbean and Pacific? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts, because this story is going to have ripple effects across the entire region for months to come. Follow me on X and Instagram. I'm posting there every single day across both of these major stories right now. Pop over to Pepperbox for exclusive content you will not find anywhere else. And get on the list for The Art of Modern War at mapbook.com. Because operations like this one, removing the sanctuary, fusing intelligence with partner capability, striking with overwhelming precision at exactly the right moment, that is the kind of strategic thinking the book is built around, and I think you are going to get a lot out of it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video right here.